Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Is it nice and big for everybody? Like, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. All right, so we're gonna go over forms tonight. So we're gonna start with listing forms, and then later on we'll go over purchase contract and disclosures at that point as well. So first on the listing side, there's something I always do before I ever go to a listing presentation, and that's making sure that the property has been previously listed on the MLS. And the reason behind that is you're allowed to, or you're able to clone from past MLS data when creating a listing. So, for example, let's say I was going to go add in a new listing, and this is at a later date, um, but we're going to go pull in and make sure that the information is accurate from a prior listing. So, a home I just sold was this address, and I'm going to hit next. And if it's been previously listed in the MLS, not only will you be able to pull in tax records from the assessor's website, but these are the previous MLS listings. The bottom one, the highest number on the MLS number, is going to be the most recent and should, in theory, be the most accurate. So by seeing this, I'm seeing that it's been previously listed, and I'll need to double check the prior MLS information for accuracy. But that being said, I don't have to worry about entering every single piece of information. So that's just something I always look for before I go on any kind of listing meeting. Also, before you go to a listing meeting, I would consider potentially bringing a sign and a lockbox in hopes that you get your listing. At least keep it in your car. And then obviously, if for some reason you don't get it, you can bring it back. But it's just better off to be prepared. And then the other thing I bring with me on listing presentations, other than comps, if you want to bring some comps, is all the documentation and paperwork. So we're at the MLS homepage right now. You can get all your necessary listing forms from this part of the MLS right here. So if you go to forms and then you go down to broker forms, this is going to bring up a whole list of documents that are needed for various different real estate transactions in the state of Illinois. For listing purposes, you're going to need either the residential exclusive right to sell listing agreement or the exclusive agency agreement. Obviously we recommend the residential exclusive right to sell marketing agreement. So if you click on this here, you can autofill, or you can fill this out by typing and going throughout. We can go through that. We're going to go through that. But you could also print it out and handwrite it if you prefer. So you're going to need the residential exclusive right to sell marketing agreement. You're going to need a radon disclosure for all homes that you sell. You're going to need a seller property disclosure form on all homes that you sell. And then lastly, if the home was built prior to 1978, you'll need the lead-based paint disclosure. So you can get all of those forms directly straight from the MLS under broker forms. So first, we'll go through the disclosures first. We'll start with the lead-based paint. Like I said, you only need the lead-based paint if the house was built prior to 1978. So we're going to start there. You're going to start with the property address. So I'm just going to go with that same property that I pulled up off the MLS. It's my good buddy Joe Dunn's house, so hopefully he doesn't care too much. So you could type in the address, and then at the listing appointment, this is the section that you're going to need to be filled out by your seller. So you're going to go over sections A and B here. You're going to ask your seller if they have any kind of knowledge or record of lead-based paint in their home. 99 times out of 100, they're not. So you're going to have this box checked off and this box checked off, and then you are going to have them initial next to A and B. And then the purchaser's acknowledgement is done at the contract point, so it's not handled at listing. You're going to initial down here saying that you've informed your client of their obligations to disclose lead-based paint if it's in their home. And then your client is going to sign and date down here. and you're going to sign and date down here. So that form's pretty straightforward. That's the lead-based paint disclosure. Next up, we got the radon disclosure. This one's very similar to the lead-based paint disclosure. You're going to go ahead and put the address, city, state, and zip at the bottom. And then you're going to come up here and ask them if they have any knowledge of elevated levels of radon on the premises, or if they have any record of elevated radon levels on the premises. You know, most times people that are living on a certain piece of land, if they have knowledge of elevated radon, they've done something to mitigate that, whether it's installing a mitigation system or whatever. So most times they're not going to know if they have elevated levels of radon or records showing elevated levels of radon. So if that's the case, like they don't have knowledge or records of elevated levels of radon, then they're going to initial next to C and D. You're going to initial next to G as the agent, saying that you inform them that they have obligation to disclose elevated levels of radon if they are aware of it or if they have records showing. Then down at the bottom, the sellers or your client are going to sign and date, and you are going to sign and date as the agent. And that's the radon disclosure. Next up, we got the residential real property disclosure report form. You're going to start out with the address, city, state, and zip at the top. Excuse me. Followed up by the seller's names. You're going to put the date that they signed this disclosure. Today would be June 15th, 2020. And then you're going to go down to this list of 23 questions or 23 potential disclosures needed for your client. So first you're going to ask them if they've occupied the property within the last 12 months, yes or no. And then you're going to go through each one of these things. Some of them might not be applicable. For example, I'm aware of material defects in the well or well equipment. Obviously, if the home doesn't have a well, you would just check NA here. But for most of these, it's either going to be no for most of them, or if they do know of a defect, for example, let's say they know that a couple of the windows have been broken. Let's say, for example, there's a broken window in the basement. There's nothing wrong with that. You just check that, yes, you're aware of a defect. And then down here in this paragraph, you just explain why you checked yes. So, are you aware of material defects in walls, windows, doors, or floor? Yes, I am. There's actually a broken window in the basement. So, your client doesn't have to be worried about, disclosing something. They should disclose something if they know there's an issue. This is just making sure that the buyer is aware of the state of the home and all of the potential latent defects in the home that they can't see on the surface. So you're going to go through this list of 23 items with the seller. When you're done with that, they're going to sign and date saying that we answered these questions truthfully, honestly, and to the best of our ability. And then you're going to go down here and have them sign. And then you'll put this date in when you have a buyer that wants to put in a contract. So that's it for the real property disclosure. And then finally, the last listing form is the residential exclusive right to sell marketing agreement, aka the listing agreement. You're going to go through this. It's 6 pages. You're going to need all 6 pages filled out. We'll start at the top. The brokerage, just so everybody knows, the brokerage is Village Realty, Inc. Period. This is not Village Realty Shop. It is Village Realty Inc. And then you're going to put Mike Glenn as your managing broker, and then this is your name. So whatever your name is here as a designated agent. And then you're going to put your seller's names over here. You're going to come down here and say the title to the property is in the name of, and it's usually in the name of the seller. They're always in the name of the seller, excuse me. And then you're going to come down to the property line. So you got the address, unit number if applicable, the city, county, state, zip code, PIN number, which you can find from the MLS. So, for example, if we went to that 911 Crystal Lane, I just closed. The PIN number is right here, just so everybody's aware. It's right in the tax section of a listing. Okay, so you'd put this on the line that has to do with the permanent index number. And then you come down here to the terms and conditions of the listing agreement. I recommend always trying to get 180 days for a listing agreement. The least I've ever taken is 90, I believe. Even if somebody's trying to push 90, I always try to get a little more if possible. But this agreement should be the day that the property is going to hit the market and then the day that it expires. So let's say today's Monday. Let's say the listing's going to go live on Thursday. That's the date I'm going to put on this line. So during those days, I should have it listed and ready to sell. This next portion here has to do with discrimination, fair housing laws. By initialing these two lines, this line and these boxes, your sellers are saying that they understand that it is illegal for them to discriminate against buyers based on any of the following: race, age, color, religion, sex, ancestry, order of protection status, marital status, physical or mental handicaps, familial status, national origin, sexual orientation, military status, or any other class protected by fair housing laws. So they're just going to initial there saying that, they're not going to discriminate against any buyers based on any of those reasons. Down here, this is going to be the initial list price of the property. I'll show you guys also where to get a listing modification form, but this will be the initial listing price of the property. Down here at number 5, managing broker designates and the seller accepts you guys as the seller's designated agent. So you're going to put your own name there. Okay. Section 6 has to do with dual agency. I personally see dual agency as a potential opportunity to make two parties come together and make a deal happen. I know certain people like Bashan have their own thoughts on dual agency, where he thinks that it should be avoided at all costs. He has his own opinion. That's fine. You can formulate your own opinion on dual agency from your experiences, and if your seller is okay with dual agency, then you would check yes. If you or your seller are not okay with dual agency, then you would check no here, and then you would just initial these boxes saying that no, we're not going to have any kind of dual agency situations here. So that's up to you guys and your sellers. Number 7, 8, 9, and 10, I kind of gloss over here. So we'll just go through that. We go straight into the commissions down here at section number 11. So I've had a number of people ask me, how exactly do you fill out these lines? Okay, let's say that we're going to charge our seller, us and our seller have agreed to 4.5 for a commission. I'm going to give them a little haircut. I'm going to take 2% on my side, and they're going to still want to offer a buyer's broker 2.5, which they don't have to. They can offer a little lower if they'd like, but let's say 4.5 for this situation. Okay, so this says that the seller agrees to pay the brokerage at the time of the closing of the sale of the property, compensation in the amount of $0 or 4.5% to be distributed 2% plus 0 of the sales price of the listing, and 2.5% minus $0 of the listing to the selling office. So this first, so 4.5 total, 2% is going to me at the listing office, and then 2% is going to the listing office, and then 2.5% is going to the selling office. So whoever brings a buyer. If you've seen on the MLS, for example, you'll see situations where, like this, for example, the buyer's broker was offered 2.5% minus 200. So, for example, in this situation, all you do is add 200 to us and minus 200 to the broker bringing a buyer. So those numbers basically offset each other. Just saying that the listing agent is going to take a little bit of what the buyer's agent would get from their 2.5, basically as a marketing fee, for lack of a better word. But in the end, it doesn't change that the total is still 4.5% here. This next line has to do with if the property is sold within the said time by seller, or if the property is sold within, let's say our agreement was for 6 months, so 180 days from the expiration date, from any prospect who the listing information was submitted to during the time of the exclusive agreement. So if you had a buyer go through 10 days before your listing expired and they came back after that expiration and wanted to buy it, you would technically still have potentially a right to commission here. So for more clarification on that, my dad could probably provide that, but I'm pretty sure that's exactly what that section has to go with. Has to do with this next section here on virtual office website policy. You would have your client initial these if they did not want their property advertised on all the various different websites that the MLS coordinates with. So the Realtor.coms, the Trulias, the Redfins. Obviously, the biggest benefit of listing with with a broker that's in the MLS. Can we make sure everybody's on mute here? There we go. So obviously the biggest benefit here.
I guess I was.
Obviously the biggest benefit here to listing with a broker that is part of a brokerage that is included with the MLS is that their listing will get syndicated to all those websites that everybody will be able to see. So, you know, almost every time this section is glossed over, obviously everybody wants you to put their property in front of as many eyeballs as possible. Section number 14, that has to do with title and survey. I always check this bottom box and explain to the seller that their attorney will make the title arrangements. I won't do that, so I would probably recommend that to you guys as well. Section number 15, you're going to go through and check any fixtures and personal property that is going to be included with the sale. If there's anything that should be excluded from the sale, for example, sometimes you'll see a garage fridge is pretty common. I usually always probably make a comment here saying, you know, garage fridge is excluded from the sale. I have a listing right now where there's a chandelier that the sellers don't want to include. I put that down here and I make sure I make a note of that on the listing as well. It's pretty explanatory here. You just go through and mark all the various different things that are going to be included with the sale of the property. Home warranty. If your seller wants to offer a home warranty up front, which some people do, this section would be filled out. You know, whether it's American Home Shield, Home Warranty of America, whatever the company is, you put the company first and then the price of the home warranty. I think Home Warranty of America is like $560, something like that for a warranty. But that's up to you and the seller to decide. Next, we're going to come down to section number 21, where it talks about taxes and assessments. If there is a special assessment that needs to be noted here, If there's no special assessments, which usually there's not, you just check is not. Is the property part of a special service area? Is or is not. And then, is it part of a condos association or a homeowners association? If it is, then you need to get the association or management company name and a contact phone number. Also, if you get a contact name, that helps too. If there is a condo or homeowners association, you need to make sure that you figure out what the fees are and how often they are, whether it's a monthly fee or a once a year master association fee. You need to note that in the listing agreement. Earnest money. Our office does hold earnest money, so as long as your seller is okay with our office holding the earnest money, which I recommend, then you would check this first box and have them initial. I have seen the rare case where the seller's attorney has recommended the seller to have the title company hold earnest money or a different escrowee. If that's the case, then you would check below and just make sure you have accurate notes on who the escrowee is going to be. You would fill in this portion right here about the lease of property. If the seller was also willing to entertain the idea of leasing their home. You do see it sometimes. It's pretty rare, but it does happen every once in a while. And then lastly, down at the bottom, you have just a bunch of information to fill out with regards to the seller, what their mailing address is, phone number, email address, same for you and the managing broker. And then lastly, just a couple notes. At the bottom of every page, you should be putting in the full address. Don't do a partial address. Don't leave it blank. Put in the full address. And then you need to have your seller initial at the bottom of every page. And then when that's all done, you bring it to the office or email it to the office, and we'll have the managing broker initial at the bottom of every page as well. A couple other forms that we were going to talk about here on the listing side was the listing modification. So that's here under number 10, the listing modification form. Here, whether it's a price change, extension of the expiration date, if you're taking it temporary off the market, this happened with the COVID stuff a little bit. Whatever you want to do here, all you got to do is fill in these boxes saying, when the agreement took place, the property, the brokerage, the seller names, and then what term on the listing is going to change. And then you just got to have it signed by the seller, yourself, and the managing broker. So make sure you're doing those if you're not currently doing those with price reductions especially. And then a couple more things. There's a couple pamphlets that you can offer your sellers. I would recommend emailing them because they're kind of extensive. They are the lead-based paint pamphlet and the radon pamphlet. Like this lead-based paint one is 15, 20 pages, and the radon one is only a couple pages. But I would recommend at least emailing these to your sellers so they have those for their records. And then lastly, if your seller agreed to dual agency on the face of the listing agreement, I would recommend getting this form signed up front by them as well. It's just a dual agency consent form. That way, if you have a buyer that's interested in the property and you're going to show it to them, I would just let them know up front, hey, I represent the seller. We can have what's called the dual agency relationship here, where I am a neutral party and help bring together a transaction. I can do these things here. I cannot do these things here. If you're comfortable with that, I need you to sign it, and then I can show you the property. Otherwise, I'm going to have somebody else take you through the home. So I would recommend having this signed up front. That way, like I said, if you have a buyer, you could present that to them before bringing them through a property, through a listing. That's pretty much it in terms of the listing side. So yeah, I mean, that's pretty much it for listing forms. If you guys have specific questions with regards to listing forms, maybe we could take a couple minutes now. You can unmute yourself and feel free to ask them. I don't know if anybody, Elena, Naoma, Betty, Sharon. I don't know if any of you guys got any questions. Doesn't seem like it. Okay.
Keep going. And then if anybody has questions, you can text me as well while he's going over a purchase agreement. So if you have a question and you want to ask it, text me your question, and when he's done with the purchase agreement, we can cover it then.
I have a quick question.
Sure.
Say if they're not on the MLS, how do you get the PIN number? Can you go over that really quick?
Yeah, so you could do this too. So here, we'll do this one. So down here is Remine. This is the homepage of the MLS. Remine is the new tax software here. So if you click on that link, it'll bring you to the third-party Remine software. And what you can do is you can do a search, and it should bring up addresses regardless of whether or not they're on the MLS. You could also potentially search by their first name. I've done that before. But you could search by this. So let's say, for example, we're doing that same one. So we pull up 911 Crystal Lane, and it's been on the MLS, so this might not be a perfect example, but down here, where's it at? Oh, right here. This APN is the PIN number as well. So, yeah, I would recommend using Remine. If you still can't find it off Remine, you could always ask them at the listing appointment if they got a copy of a recent tax bill. Or you could call the assessor's office directly. I don't know if any of you guys have called the assessor's office, but usually they're pretty quick and easy to talk to. And that would be the county assessor. So for them, it would be, the Will County assessor's office for that one.
Okay, thank you.
Of course. All right, so it doesn't sound like we got too many more questions. If they do come up, like I said, and like he said, you could text it to him, or you could unmute yourself and stop me and ask a question. So we'll go on to buyer forms here. So there's really going to be 5 pieces of documentation for a buyer. First, you're going to have your pre-approval. So you're going to have the buyer's pre-approval from a lender saying that they're approved to the purchase price of the property or above. Most times I try to match the offer price with the amount on the pre-approval if the lender will work with me and get that done. Other times I've shown that they're approved for more, so they're the seller is comfortable that with the buyer's ability to buy. So you got to have that pre-approval, otherwise your offer doesn't really hold a lot of weight. So you're gonna have their pre-approval. You're gonna have your 3 disclosures again. The lead-based paint disclosure, if it was a house built prior to 1978. And then here, if you're representing the purchaser is going to initial CD&E, saying that they've received copies of the pamphlets that I was talking about before, and then also whether or not they want to keep a 10-day opportunity to test for lead-based paint, or if they want to waive the opportunity. I've never seen anybody test specifically for lead-based paint, but I would probably try to keep it if you can. That way, if an inspector sees something fishy, then you still got that covered. And then after they've done CD&E, then your purchasers are going to sign next to where it says purchaser down here, date it, and then you're going to sign down here by agent and date it. So that's the lead-based paint form. The radon form, similar again. They're going to initial next to E and F, saying that they've gotten the disclosure and received any records, if there are any records, and they got a copy of the pamphlet. And then they're going to sign down here next to purchaser, and you're going to sign next to agent. And then seller property disclosure form. So this is all going to be filled out already. If there's anything that's disclosed, it's going to be explained down here. Your buyer will get a chance to read of any disclosed items. As long as they're good with it, then they'll sign down here. And then this will be dated on the date that it was provided to the buyer. One other thing I want to point out real quick. So, let's see if I got this updated here. So, for example, if you want to see the disclosure, so let's say your client wants to buy this property. Okay, we go, they want to buy 7931 Richardson Lane, built in 1998, so there won't be any lead-based paint disclosure. If you click on information here on the MLS, the disclosure should be attached here, and it should just be the property and radon disclosure. If they're not attached, that just means the listing agent has not attached them. So you'll need to list out to the listing agent directly and say, hey, can you send me a copy of the disclosures? So that pretty much covers the disclosures there. We've gone over the pre-approval, so now we'll go over the contract. We're going to go and do this. So this is a property that I just looked at with some clients. Let's say they wanted to submit an offer. So, okay, we looked at this. They got the disclosures up here. They look pretty clean. Okay, I don't want to go through them too much with you guys. But the disclosures are attached. It was built post-1978, so we don't have to worry about a lead-based paint disclosure. And now we want to go ahead and write a contract. If you press this little info box here, and we write a contract down here, it's going to automatically pull in quite a bit of information on this property and pull it straight into the contract. So for this example, because I don't know if they're going to want to put an offer in or not yet. I don't think they're going to. I'm not notifying the list broker. Now, if they were wanting to put an offer tonight, I would make sure I notified him that I was writing it. That way, if he's got another one out there, at least he knows mine's coming in too. Hopefully he can hold out. So we're going to go ahead and hit next. Folder name, yep. Buyer information, I'm going to put in my brother's name just for the sake of this situation. Put in his address. I don't know his phone number off the top of my head, so I'll put in my dad's. I know his. Okay, so filled in the buyer information. I don't really necessarily have to worry too much about the seller information. I'll let the listing agent handle that end of things. And then it's automatically going to pull in the brokerage information for both me as potentially the buyer's broker and the listing agent's information and their brokerage information automatically. So that's a pretty nice feature. Then down here, we're going to fill in the attorney and loan officer information if we have it. I'm going to say that he has not chosen an attorney yet, so I'm going to put TBD for to be determined. And then we'll put in Dave for the sake of this situation here. I would normally go through and put in all this information as accurately as possible. For time's sake, I'm just kind of giving you guys a feel. So we're going to hit continue. And then it's going to ask what documentation or what form do we want to fill out here. We want to fill out the residential 7.0 contract. So we're going to click that. And then I think, yeah, it's blocking me out. So I'm going to hit add form. And then boom, it's going to add in a bunch of information already for me, okay? So we're going to go through here, buyer's name correct, less than a quarter acre, All this stuff should be correct because it's coming directly from the MLS. Parking and storage, they have a garage, but it's attached to the house, so there's no issue there. We're going to double check these items. Going to say that there's definitely a water heater there. Should be a sump pump. Tack down carpeting, we want to stay. Storm screens, we want to stay. Ceiling fans, light fixtures, built-in shelving. Go up and down these lists and make sure that the stuff that you want to stay on the property after purchase is marked there. Now we're gonna go ahead and make a couple notes here of things we definitely want. So this is from today's thing. So they wanted garage fridge, or they made note of potentially wanting it. So we're gonna ask that they leave the garage fridge as well, included with the purchase price. And then items not included, so things that we want removed, please, the place in backyard. There was like an old play set that they made note in the listing that they were going to leave. My buyers don't want that. They want that gone. So we're going to say, please get that gone. Please get that out of here. The list price on the property. By the way, if you guys don't know this already, you can click over here for a new workspace on the MLS. So the purchase or the listing price on the property, come on, is $240. It's only been listed for 3 days, so they're gonna have to come in pretty close to $240. We'll say $237 for the sake of it. And my buyer needs a $2,000 credit to help cover some of their closing costs. At the same time, they're going to put up $2,000 of earnest money within 2 days of acceptance. At the bottom of every page, your buyer is going to initial, and if a seller accepts, they're going to initial down here. Earnest money is, do they hold earnest money? They do hold earnest money, the listing brokerage. So earnest money is going to be held by the seller's brokerage. Closing is going to be in 40 days. So we're going to say July 25th, 2020. Financing. My client's going to need a loan. They're getting a fixed conventional loan for 97% of the purchase price. Not going to exceed 4% for 30 years. So we're going to put in that information. If you need a little clarification on that, you could always ask a lender, but it should be on the pre-approval. Make sure that your client is initialing next to where it says loan contingency. If they were offering a cash deal, you wouldn't fill in this prior section. You would fill in this Part B here, saying that it was a cash deal with no mortgage. Once again, initially in the bottom of the page. Line C would be if there is a mortgage allowed with a cash transaction. I have seen this before. If that's the case, they'll need an initial down here. Now with a cash transaction, one note to make, there won't be a pre-approval with a cash transaction. What there will be is a proof of funds provided. So whether it's a bank statement or some kind of other income statement showing that, hey, we have the sufficient amount of cash to cover this purchase. Section number 8 has to do with the disclosures. Yes, we have received a real property disclosure. I've given my buyer the pamphlets here. We did not get a lead-based paint disclosure because it's not required. So we're going to check no. Prorations. Section A has to do with tax prorations. It's almost always at 105%. If it's been like a foreclosed property, sometimes you'll see 100% that the bank will prorate the taxes at when selling. But more times than not, you're going to see 105 here. I wouldn't get too caught up on prorations as the attorneys will sort it out. So I wouldn't freak out too much. Section B is going to automatically pull in that there's a $60 monthly HOA fee. So that's going to be noted there. Once again, they're initialing the bottom of the page. Attorney review is going to be 5 business days after acceptance. So that's automatically built into the contract. My client is not waiving professional inspections. They're going to want an inspection. Now, if they were willing to waive the inspection, I would make sure they initial down here and make a note of that to the seller that, hey, you know, they're not even going to have an inspection here. They're willing to waive it. So, like I said, most buyers will want an inspection like this buyer would. So we're going to leave this section blank. Number 12 talks about professional inspections. Don't need to worry too much about that. Just that they got to be done within the attorney review period, so they got to be done pretty much right away. You know, the buyer has to secure homeowner's insurance on the home before closing on it. If there's been flood insurance on the property, or if it's required, then a buyer will often have the right to get out of that purchase agreement. When it comes to deed, title, transfer tax, I let the attorneys handle a lot of that. Plat survey is going to be handled by the attorney as well. Come down to section 22 where it talks about seller representations. They're going to say there is not improvements to the real estate which are not included in the most recent tax assessment. There are not improvements to the real estate which are eligible for home improvement tax exemption. There is not pending special assessments, and it is not within a special assessment area. If I have a buyer, I'm checking all those, and if the seller says differently, then we'll handle that, you know, upon counter. Then after that, section 29 talks about dual agency. So if you have a dual agency situation, you'll need all parties to initial off here saying that they're okay with it. Even though you already have the signed disclosure of dual agency form, you still need them to initial section 29 saying that you are the dual agent and they're okay with that. Section 30 has to do if they're going to be submitting their offer contingent on sale or contingent on closing their current piece of real estate, their current home. So we're going to go through this real quick. So the buyer represents to the seller that the buyer owns real estate with this address. So you're going to put in the address. So we're going to put in my address. So I'm going to try to buy this house contingent on having to sell it. Okay. So this is my address. I have not entered into a contract to sell my real estate. Okay. So then we're going to skip A, B, and C. Okay. If I have entered into a contract to sell it, then we're going to initial these as applicable. So I've not entered into a contract to sell my real estate, but I have listed my home for sale with a broker in the MLS. If buyer's real estate is not publicly listed for sale, so I don't have to worry about 4 because my home's listed already. If my home was not listed, then I have to worry about section 4. And I need to get my home up for sale as soon as possible. Contingencies based upon the sale and closing of real estate. So this contract is contingent upon buyer having entered into a contract. So this does not apply to me because I have not entered into a contract for the sale of my real estate. So this does not apply. And then this one would go along the same lines. So this has to do if you're contingent on closing. So if I was contingent on closing, so my contract was dated 3 days ago, so June 12, 2020. And in the event the buyer has entered into a contract for the sale of buyer's real estate, and that contract is in full force of effect, this contract is contingent upon buyer closing the sale of real estate. So I have to close my sale by June 27th. If the seller, after accepting this offer, got a new offer that was not contingent on a sale or a closing, then they would have, 24, 48, or 72 hours to give me the notice that they have gotten a new offer, and then I have that amount of time to match or drop the contingency to satisfy the contract. It's also called the kick-out clause. If I have waived my contingency from that prior, so let's say I said, okay, you know what, I'm going to waive my contingency that I have to close on my sale, and I'm going to buy your house anyway, then I have to put up additional earnest money. So I'm going to put up an additional $2,000 of earnest money. Cancellation of prior real estate contract. So if I'm kicking out a different offer, so let's say that I'm not contingent on selling or closing, I'm a clean offer, and I'm going to kick out somebody that's currently under contract with this seller, contingent on a sale, then this section is going to say that they're going to cancel or kick out the other real estate contract by 2-3 days from now, whatever date you put on here. If you need clarification on that, we could provide clarification. If the buyer wants to ask for a home warranty, or if the seller's offering it up front, line section 32 is where you'd put that in there. You would have make sure your buyer and seller initial here, and then you're putting in the value of the home warranty here. So say $560. If there's a well or a septic, and the buyer wants an inspection on them, then you'll have them initial here. For a well inspection, they'll definitely at least test the water levels to make sure they're safe for drinking. I'm not 100% sure if they actually inspect the well to make sure how well it's operating, but they for sure at least test the levels of the water. But if they want a well and septic inspection, they're going to have it initialed here. VA loans require termite inspections. Also, certain municipalities do as well. If your buyer wants or needs a termite inspection at the seller's expense, then they would just initial here. It's pretty rare that there's possession after closing, but it does happen sometimes. So let's say that the buyer is going to give the seller a week after closing to possess the property. Then we're going to check this and say that they're going to have 7 days after the date of closing. And then, they're going to have 7 days for $700. Something like that, $500, whatever the amount is. And then if they go beyond that, they're going to have to pay a penalty per day. So that's that section. As is condition, if they're going to buy a property as is, not ask for any kind of repairs, they're going to initial here. That's different than waiving a right to an inspection. Under a normal as is deal, they can still have an inspection and walk if they're not happy with the result of the inspection. But that's just saying that they're going to take the property as is as long as everything's good with the inspection and attorney review, etc. If the property is a short sale or multi-unit, a couple other things, there's certain addendums that you could find under broker forms on the MLS. those would be checked here and added as an addendum to the contract. Down here, all this is already filled in. You'll need the buyer's signature and to date the offer. But that's really the contract as a whole. So you're gonna have all this filled out. You're gonna send your offer over to the seller or to the seller's broker. The broker is gonna review it with their seller, and they're either gonna accept, reject, or counter. If they've countered, what they'll do is, let's say the purchase price was the only item that they couldn't agree to, that the seller couldn't agree to. What they'll do is they'll strike through the number, put a new purchase price here, and initial next to it. And if your buyer's good with the counter price, then they'll just initial next to where the new purchase price is put in over here. But that's the same with any term of the contract. So whether it's the purchase price, the credit given, if they want more earnest money, etc. If they want less hours on a kickout clause, those all can be struck through and countered. So that's really it. And then let me just make sure I'm not missing any forms here with a purchase contract. Sometimes you'll see mandatory clauses like the FHA clause or a VA clause. I would let the lenders and the attorneys handle those clauses. Seller's estimated net sheet. I've had a lot of people ask me about these. If I have a seller that really needs to know what their potential estimated net proceeds are, I will make sure I go over this with their attorney. I'll make sure, because that's going to be the most accurate. The attorney's going to have insights of their entire situation here. So I always recommend, asking the attorney to review that before just totally going over it with a seller. Other than that, that's really it when it comes to a purchase agreement. Dad, do you feel like I'm missing anything here? No.
No, I think you're good. In fact, you've already taught me something I didn't know. And I don't have any questions at the moment. Unless anybody has some that they want to ask. I haven't had any texted to me.
Elena, Betty, Sharon? Nope. All right.
Wait. I kind of have a question.
Yeah.
It's about the listing that I have.
Okay.
And the seller, she's been unresponsive for several months to me. She doesn't talk to me or answer my calls or messages. But meanwhile, I'm getting a lot of people asking me to go see the property or put in an offer or something. But it doesn't look like she wants to sell it anymore. Should I just keep it in the MLS or do something else about it?
Unless you have written directions of how to change your listing, I would just keep it as is. Obviously, you'll have an expiration date. Right. But yeah, I would just work on trying to get a hold of your seller as much as possible and try to clarify what's going on.
And once it expires, is it automatically out of the MLS, or do I have to do something about it?
It's going to show up as an expired listing. So here, let's see if I could Mallard. What was Mallard's 115? It's going to show up at here. Actually, that was pulling some up. So, for example, this one right here. So it's still going to show up on the MLS, right? Still going to show up with the price and information. Still going to have the broker's information down here. Still going to have details about the home. But people aren't going to... It's not going to be actively listed. So people who are doing new searches aren't going to see it. Other agents will probably try to contact your seller to try to list it as an expired. But it's not going to be your listing anymore, basically, once the expiration hits.
And that happens automatically. I don't have to do anything. Right?
Yeah, you don't have to do anything about it. It actually will probably give you heads up for a couple days ahead of time, like a week ahead of time, saying that, hey, this one's going to expire here in the next 7 days, next 3 days, next 1 day. It'll let you know, but you don't have to do anything to like expire it. It just automatically does it.
Okay, thank you. I do have one more question. As far for when you're writing a contract to purchase a property,
Yeah.
how do you determine the escrow money?
The
That's what
earnest
it's
money?
called? Oh, the earnest money, right? Sorry.
No, you're fine. No,
How
that's
much earnest money to put down, and also the amount, like the line above the earnest money, that how much the purchase costs to be covered.
the credits.
Right. That.
Okay, so personally, this is how I do it. For a normal residential purchase, I always tell people that the earnest money is going to go towards their down payment, right? It's also going to go towards closing costs if it's above down payment. I always recommend about roughly 1% of the purchase price. So this one is $237. Could have gone $2,000, could have gone $2,500 for earnest money here. It's kind of just what I recommend is somewhere around 1% of the purchase price. If you had a $500,000 house, this might be $5,000. And then for a credit, you're going to want to clarify that with both your buyer and the lender. I would ask to make sure that, do they need a certain amount of credit to help them cover closing costs? Do they not need any at all? The less you can ask for here, the better. But a lot of people need a credit to help cover a large majority of their closing costs, especially first-time home buyers. They'll need, $5,000 or up to 3% of a purchase price to cover closing costs. So I would just make sure you have that conversation with your buyer, asking them, how much cash do they have available, and then also are they comfortable with bringing that amount of cash to the closing, and then also with their lender to make sure that their lender's on the same page too.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Anybody else got questions? All right. I think we're good. Thank you, Michael, for doing it.
Yep.
Yeah, thank you very much.
No problem.
Surprisingly, I learned something from you as well.
What'd you
today.
learn?
Yeah, what did you learn? I want to know too.
I did not know that you could simply do a second screen by clicking on that.
Oh yeah, over here.
Because like a lot of times you'll be in something and you're trying to fill it out, and then you want to go back and look at something, and I would typically open up a whole nother screen, like logging in again.
Yeah, the only thing you got to be careful with,
And then it's bouncing out sometimes.
the only problem, yeah, that happens. The only problem you got to be careful with this thing here when you click new workspace is I'll do it like once, maybe twice, and then like make sure I get to a spot where I can like X everything out and kind of like get back in, because it like starts bugging out a little bit.
Yeah.
But yeah, especially for situations where you're trying to like write up a contract or a disclosure, and you want to look at the listing page as well. That helps a lot.
And just entering a new listing in sometimes.
Yeah, for sure.
All right. Wait, I got a text. Is it anybody? Nope. If not anybody from here.